I'd like to welcome everybody to the second in our series of NSA professional webinar sessions. This one is the Pathway to Success on SXE Data Conversion, July 25th, 2018. So for those that may not be very familiar with NSA, I'll just kind of quickly go through a little bit of history about our organization. NSA has been in business since 1984. SXE and all variants of SXE, back in the day known as Trend, it's the only ERP solution that NSA supports and implements. We're focused exclusively in the distribution market. NSA's culture is built around what we call the NSA touch, which is our personal commitment to the success of each of our clients. We firmly believe that every client certainly is unique, and we look to ensure that we're delivering the best value that we can out of SXE to our clients, whatever version that may make sense for them, whether it would be on-premise or cloud-based. Our clients do range widely from anywhere from 10 SXE seats all the way up to north of 2,500 users. We work with both privately and publicly traded companies. We even assist companies in going public that may be interested. In 2016, NSA became the first alliance partner for Infor in the SXE space. What that basically means is we can supplement the direct Infor staff for supporting clients, and we've done that actually in an informal way for probably the last 20 plus years. So that actually formalized the process for both Infor and NSA at that time, and we're very pleased and proud to have that distinguishment. We have the largest team of SXE experts, and that even includes Infor, with 11 full-time consultants. They have a minimum of 15 years experience on SXE, with over 22 years average experience in the field itself. And as I mentioned, we have the largest and most experienced team in that particular space. Doing the core presentation today for us, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker for today, Colin Rhino. He is a senior business consultant with NSA. Like a lot of the other specialists, he has been with NSA quite a long time. He started with NSA in 1993, which means he's in his 25th year with our organization. He is our subject matter expert specific to data conversion. He does other things as well, but that's one of the areas that he really has a very deep focus on. He works with all different versions of SXE, from Chewy to GUI to WebUI, and basically has done data conversion with virtually any and every flavor and type of SXE. He also has other primary responsibilities, including project management from an initial sale to go live. He designs and documents customization packages for our clients as well. He provides in-depth training, on a variety of different aspects of SXE along the way, and also works with a variety of third-party tools with NSA also. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Colin. And Colin, I will drive for you, so just simply let me know when you would like me to advance the slides. Well, I may have muted Colin. Let me see if I can't open him up here. Okay, Colin, can you try your audio once again?
Okay, I'm going to start. Okay.
There we go.
You can hear me now? Cool.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, Brian, could you just perhaps go to the next slide and we'll get started on this. Okay, data conversion is what we're going to cover today, and it's a really big topic, and we have a very small amount of time to go through it. I do want to kind of discuss our agenda and what we're going to list. I have a couple of things I'd like to add on the end if time permits, but I don't know if that's going to happen or not. It really kind of depends on the questions and answers we get into. This is probably the first and foremost thing that we'll get into. And then I want to talk a little bit about what's needed in order to prepare for doing conversions. Then take a quick run through on the steps in the data conversion process, and talk about other considerations about, when does it make sense to do data conversions versus keying and so on. We're going to have kind of a really brief chat on benefits of having NSA managing this project. And really that's just going to be, going through, what you would want to do first time versus next time and so on. There's a large number, and there's a lot of stuff that's out there that can be very beneficial for doing. And if time permits after that, maybe you can go through some of the cross references that are available. But we're going to get started on the when is data conversion needed. Some of the most common things we have listed on this slide. When acquiring another company, that's probably where I get called in more than any other time. But there are other times when vendors give us mass updates, annual product price changes, where we know that perhaps, loading the price changes, no big deal. We can use some of the functions that are available in standard SX and all the versions to do that. But when we get those mass updates, maybe I have to redo all my customer pricing. And, when that happens, it could be that, if I'm going to be prepping hundreds of pricing records that I want to load, it doesn't make sense to have somebody go in and manually key those into the system. If I can do it in an outside format, such as Excel, Access, whatever it is, sometimes it just makes more sense to do it outside and import that data in. Some other examples there, when we're taking on a new vendor or a new product line from a vendor, we say, hey, we're going to take on these other 600 products that they provide. Well, I don't really want somebody keying a lot of that data in for a couple of reasons. A, it's time consuming, and I'm going to have to tie up key people to do this. And accuracy wise, if I'm importing it, I'm going to take it directly from the source, and it's going to get loaded exactly as I want. I don't have to worry about people interpreting this. And one other thing about when data conversion is needed, when it just makes sense to do it outside of SX. Anytime that I have a situation where I have to modify hundreds of records outside, the SX interface is great to take you in and allow you to create and update records in a very specific format. But, it's not great when it comes to copying and making slight changes on hundreds of records. Then it's a lot easier to use some of the tools that are available, Windows and Unix and so on, rather than doing it directly in the database. Brian, can you go forward? Okay. First thing after discussing the when, I want to talk about the preparation we would do to determine or to get ready for data conversion. Probably the number one thing there is cross-referencing. We're always going to have situations where the data that we're looking to import is not going to match up with the data that's in our system. And to do cross-referencing, to set those up beforehand, takes a lot off the errors out of the actual loading. When I say cross-referencing, it's usually one field to another, where perhaps in the company that I have just acquired, they have a customer that exists in my system as well. Well, I want to set up a cross-reference before I begin loading that says, hey, this is the customer that's going to be in the data file importing, but this is the customer in my database that this refers to. And there's a lot of cross-references that are available out there. Certainly for all the master files, your warehouses, your customers, your vendors, your products. We have cross-references available for those, and we just got to make sure that we get them set up before we attempt to start the converting. We also have to do a couple of checks on database sizes. The last thing I want to do is start importing data and come up with an error that shuts our database down. We just want to check and make sure that we have the growth room for that internally. And if it's not something that you have someone in your organization who is comfortable doing, we can certainly help out with that. I also like to refresh our test database, because it's kind of my rule of thumb that if I'm going to be loading data, I want to take my first pass off it in your test environment, not in your live environment. Even though it's usually new data that we're loaded, I still want to do it in the test environment just to get a better sense of safety in doing it. Freeing up space or allocating space to load data and audit files. Let's face it, if we get large data files, you know, a couple 100,000 new products that we're going to load, 3 million new customers and ship-tos that we're going to load, they take up physical space. And we just want to make sure that, hey, we're going in and we're prepping for that beforehand so that we're not going to be transferring files over and suddenly hit a space limit and cause issues. And then going over the conversion layouts. And that's not a small thing. If we look at some of the data files that exist in SX, there are literally hundreds of fields. And probably for most data conversions, we end up populating maybe 25 to 50% of those fields. There are cases where, you know, it's closer to 75 to 100% of the fields are populated with data, but that's probably not the norm. And going through those conversion layouts is often where we will get into, you know, finding the issues that we're going to run into, what doesn't fit. All right, Brian, can you go to our next slide, please? Okay. This slide, we want to talk about the process steps that we would follow if we were going to do a data conversion. First here is extracting the data from the existing legacy system. And, you know, this is one that usually you need some local expertise on. Somebody who is familiar with where this data is coming from so that they can pull it as close as possible to the format that we would like to load it in. It's very often not going to be possible that it's going to be pulled out exactly the way that we want, but, you know, we can take it as close as we have or as close as we can get, and we can do some reformatting on it to get it loaded into SX. Second thing that we have there is formatting the extracted data into the required layouts. Very often, we have to use something in the middle between the way that we extracted the data and the way that we're going to try and import it. Probably the most common tool that we use for that is Excel, but, you know, it could be anything else that's out there. It could be any of the report writers that are out there that we can connect and manipulate data with. It could be straight data manipulation in Unix. It could be using any of the other databases that are out there where we have local knowledge, in-house knowledge of how to pull this stuff in and manipulate it. There's also a lot of other, you know, data tools that are out there. Mercator mapping and tools like that you'll have somebody who may be familiar within your organization who can do manipulation on this. And the idea there is, you know, the more manipulation you can do to get it correct, then the less expense you're going to have in getting anyone else involved in doing it. But if necessary, there are also other organizations out there who offer data manipulation as a service. There's a lot of good ones. And, you know, a simple internet search for your local community will usually find someone who can help with that. At NSA, we will help with it as well, but, you know, that's not our primary thing. If you need it, there's very little in data that I cannot manipulate, but, you know, if you can get it done locally without having to get us involved, all the better. Then we have the next step, which is actually running the SXE data conversion programs. Not difficult to do, and for a first pass, we would always like to do this against a test database. And running those programs is going to produce a set of log files, and that's kind of the critical piece on this, the log files. These log files tell us what's wrong with our data, and there's really two kinds of errors that we'll come up with. The first being format errors, where I am expecting a customer that should be a numeric field, because that's how it's set up in SX. Yet when I read it in, I get alpha customers. Well, you know, if we use our cross-referencing functionality, it should have found a cross-reference and switched it from being an alpha to a numeric. Well, what if our cross-referencing wasn't complete? Well, that's what's going to show up in these error logs. And actually, that's probably where a good bit of the time in the whole data conversion process is spent, is doing these loads, seeing what the errors are, reloading until we get it to a point where we can do a load where we don't have errors. So we review the logs until we get those cleaned up, and then we validate that our data is correct, And probably the most important piece of data conversion is doing the balancing after the fact. If I'm importing, let's say, OpenAR, it's of no value to me if that balance to the penny. It has to. There's no way that any auditor is ever going to let me away with, hey, my OpenAR is $100 off. It may not be worth the value of $100 to go and investigate that, but we know if it's $100 off, there's something wrong in this process, and that's just not allowed. It has to be exact. There are other things that we convert where, we don't have a simple dollar figure that we can go out and match to. Things like old catalog items or pricing records and so on, where we, I can count my original file, but, hey, I had 1,000,007 records in Excel. I can make sure that, hey, I have 1,000,007 records in SX. Is that really in balance? Well, it's as close as we can come in those situations. Much easier to balance the things that have quantities and dollar figures associated with them. And that's kind of our sign off that, hey, we got it right when we get through that balancing step. All right, Brian, can you move on to our next slide? Okay. The process steps here. Okay, yes, sorry. Considerations. Okay. Before ever attempting a data conversion, we've got to look at the data and say, hey, does this make sense to convert? I have worked with clients over the years where, we've spent 2 or 3 hours figuring out, how we're going to get pricing records because we know that there's a pricing load coming. We need to get our customer pricing set up right in the system. Then we actually do the load, and I discover it was 37 records we did this for. That really wasn't worthwhile doing. So what I try and do with all of these is go through and check this data out before I ever get started on the conversion process. Go in and look at our master file. We might be converting GL, customer, vendor, product, system, pricing, operators, all of that stuff. Go through and determine, hey, based upon the data we're seeing out there, what is it that we would want to convert and when does it make sense to convert? And when we get to the bottom of the slide, I'm going to kind of go through a few of my rules of thumb as to when it makes sense to convert. But then we do a field by field review. What the field does in the system that we're taking it from, what it impacts, and how it gets used currently. We're going to need that because in many situations, what something is called in SX and what something is called in a different legacy system can be completely different. And, I often use product category as a main driver for that because I know in the SX world, my product category is what I can do sales analysis on, but also it's what I can use to drive to the GL. That's what I can use to figure out where I'm going to hit my balance sheet, for my inventory accounts and that sort of thing. It's also what I can use to drive to my income statement. Well, product category in many systems has nothing to do with how it would impact your general ledger. So oftentimes, something that might be called product category in another system could be used for pricing. Well, I know I would want to map that to my product price type in the SXE world. And sometimes, I have data that's out there and I don't know what I'm going to use it for, but it's data that I don't want to lose, in which case I try and map it into some user fields so that, if the need arises, I've got it somewhere and I can get it. So we do a field by field review and we determine, hey, if we have incompatible data types. If we do, that's when we have to determine what we're going to do about this. Is it something we're going to cross-reference? Is it something that we have to say, well, instead of using this field, I'm going to put it somewhere else? Or just what it is that we're going to do to resolve the issue with this. So we try to come up with a plan for any incompatible data types we have. And then we also have to determine a many-to-one or one-to-many relationship, because some will work and some will not. Let's say warehouse records. If I know that on my legacy system, I am taking 2 locations in a company that I acquired, and I'm going to combine them into one of my existing locations. Well, a many-to-one relationship will work with that. We would have to set up our cross-references so that, hey, warehouse A maps to warehouse main in my system, maybe warehouse B also maps to that. And we would have to determine what we're going to do for situations where, we need to combine quantities and so on. But we are also going to run into situations where Combining is not going. The data that's incoming, but I have to split it out into two separate warehouses in the SX world. Well, that's not going to work. If we have that situation, we're going to have to do some outside processing before we ever attempt to do a data conversion and get that loaded into SX. Let's face it, all data conversion is, simply mapping. There's no rocket science involved. It's a simple process, but, if it has to be planned out well. And then we should talk about when it makes sense to convert records. We have two situations listed on our final point on that slide, and one of them talks about simple records, and one of them talks about complex records. I would call a simple record something like a table value setup, where, maybe it's product category, where this code has this description and maybe one or two other pieces of data. I consider a record to be a simple setup if I have less than 10 pieces of data that's associated with it. If I have that, in my simple rule of thumb, if I have more than 200 records in simple, I would convert it. If I have less than 200 on a simple setup, I usually don't bother. There's always exceptions to that rule, but that's kind of my rule of thumb. But then we talk about complex records. Let's say a customer master file or a product master file where I have hundreds of pieces of data. Then I change the rules for that. Maybe if I have less than 50, I want somebody to key it. But if I get more than 50, I want to convert this in. The last thing I want to do is take a busy person's valuable time and have them keying something that, could be loaded programmatically in a short period of time. But it's going to make sense. Do I invest my time in doing a conversion if it's something that, can be keyed in? Alrighty, Brian, you want to move on to the next one? Other considerations. Okay. Data cleansing is a big one here. If we are taking on data from a legacy system, we have to do deduping. That's probably the big thing that's there. If I have a customer in my system that's the same as the customer in the legacy system, I can map the two together, but I have to do that because the last thing I want to end up with is to have one customer with multiple records in my system where I have to send out two statements, have to set up pricing records multiple times, have to deal with customer inquiries and figure out which customer it was related to. The deduping, we have to just plan for that appropriately. Consider taking only active records. Well, that really kind of depends on where it's coming from as to how much data you're going to need. It also kind of depends on your company. If I am talking, pricing records as an example, I would only want to take something that was active that's currently in use because historical pricing records, I don't really care about. But if I was talking closed orders, I like to take over closed order history. I kind of have a rule of thumb that, for any data that I'm taking over for closed orders, I want at least the last couple of years of closed history. Why? Mainly for purchasing reasons. If I am a buyer and I am looking at usage that has been converted from another system, and I see, hey, they used 25 last month, 30 the month before, 5,000 the month before, 20 the month before that, I would see that 5,000 and I want to know what happened there. If I have closed order history, I can usually do that. I can go and see, oh yeah, somebody, this sales rep made this sale. Maybe I can call them and say, hey, what happened there? Oh, they're opening a new facility, so they bought this. And I would know, hey, that's non-repetitive usage. I don't want that counted, and so on. But if I don't have that historical data out there, I can't see that. So, in that situation, I do want to take inactive records, at least for X amount of time. There's also taxonomy issues here. This is the chance for us to standardize on abbreviations. Probably the big one I run into in almost every conversion that I work on, terms codes. It's unbelievable how many codes there are out there for net 30. Oftentimes when I'm doing the conversion, I'll be taking 7 or 8 that I'm mapping to 1 in SX. But, N3 means N30, 17 means N30, A1 means N30. We just want to go through and make that as consistent as possible so that we have good looking data. one opportunity that presents itself, especially when it comes to customer and ship-to addresses, is sometimes we will do address validation as part of the conversion, where if we're going to be pulling out all of our customers and addresses and manipulating the data anyhow, it could be a good time to do data validation. And we have an interface to a product called Smarty Street that we use just because it has a very friendly interface where we can take an Excel spreadsheet and we can feed Smarty Streets an address. And what it will do is it will give us back 3 pieces of data or 3 possible answers. It'll say, hey, here is a fixed address if it was something minor where, you know, the abbreviation wasn't the way that it should be for U.S. Postal Service standards, or if the city abbreviation was incorrect and so on. So it'll either feed us back a replacement to say this is what it should be, or it could come back and say, hey, here's what we think it might be, but we need somebody to look at this and see if we are correct. In which case, it sends back a possibility to say, hey, here's what we think this is. And the third answer we get back is, hey, we can't find this. This is something we don't think is valid, and we can't offer anything. Well, all of these, you know, if I have this in a spreadsheet, it's very easy for me to take, hey, here's the recommendations, copy those over my address field. Here's the ones that I don't know about. Well, you know, somebody's got to look at these. We need a human involved to go in and take care of these. So validation of addresses is just one of the things that we can do. But the big thing kind of to think about with this is that there's no better time to ever clean up your data than when converting it. It is the perfect opportunity. Very often it's at a time when you don't seem to have time to do these things, but you know, there's never been a better time. If you're going to be moving the data anyhow, it's also times to do things that, you know, mass updates. Maybe you want all your product descriptions to be in caps. So, you know, hey, if I had that data in Excel, I might as well just switch it there. Maybe I want all of my customer names to be proper case instead of like, you know, a mixture of all caps and lowercase and so on. So, you know, that's also, you know, there's good tools available to do that kind of data manipulation, and there's no better time to do it. All right, moving right along. Benefits of having NSA manage the process. Probably the number one there is that for most conversions, we've done them before, and we can let you know where you're likely to run into issues. Is it a requirement? Absolutely not. Anyone who's on this phone call can go out to the Infor website and they can download the conversion guide, they can download the maps, and they can figure out how to do it themselves. And I have no issue with anyone doing that. It's just if you're going to be doing a lot of them, it might be a good idea to have somebody help you with the first one, and then you're good to do it on your own. I often get calls from clients who will say, hey, can you just do this for me? And I have no problem doing that. But if I had my preference, I'd rather do it with them, show them all the stuff that I'm doing so that next time, you know, hey, they can just do it on their own. No sense in me doing it for them multiple times. Where I do like to get in here is understanding the potential issues and what to do about avoiding them. I might not have all the answers, but chances are if you're running into something with data, I've talked to somebody who's done it before. Sometimes people don't like the answers I have, but I usually have an answer on them. Streamlining the process might save a little bit of time, and less disruptive and quicker than attempting on your own. That's probably the main reason why I get involved in these. Anybody can do it, but a lot of times it'll just save time to get myself or someone else involved. Validation of in balancing to the legacy system. I have more Q&Ds that I run on converted data to come up with quick totals by warehouse, by date, by whatever it happens to be, so that we don't have to figure out and pull information from multiple reports to do that balancing. Usually I can do Q&D programs that we can use to run and say, okay, here's the number that we should be trying to balance to. And kind of the last one in there, say, we try and help with at least the initial conversion and then get you set up so that you can do it going ahead. That doesn't mean, hey, the relationship cuts off at that point. If you have a problem, give me a call. But hopefully after we do the first one, you feel comfortable with it and you can do it on your own. Now, I oftentimes deal with clients who, you know, it doesn't happen once a year, once every 2 years. It's like every 12 years they run into an issue with this. And then they call me and say, hey, I don't remember what I did 12 years ago. let's do this over again. But if possible, if it's something that you're doing on a regular basis, we go through it once and you're good to go moving forward. All right, Brian, can you go to our next slide here? And I hope it doesn't sound like I'm rushing through this, but I kind of am, just because, we have limited time here. Key takeaways. Proper preparation will set you up for an easier process. The preparation is the key to this. You prepare right, you won't have a problem. Having a defined and proper process to minimize disruption, because, at some point we got to take our data and we got to insert it into the real life database, and we got to make sure that our users are ready for this. That, they got new products popping up, new vendors popping up, new terms codes popping up. We want to make sure that, we have the proper process and that everybody's aware of this. Validating and balancing, it's, that's what we need to do to get proper sign-off to say, hey, this was successful. And just the point there's no better time to clean up or manipulate data. And sometimes that doesn't have to be just when we're taking it from another system, but I could look at my SHIP2 file, and I see, I've got people in 60 locations across the country who are keying in here. And some people have put everything in caps, and other people have put it in proper case. And some people have typed in EXT on a phone number, and other people have just used the slash to separate extensions and so on. Oftentimes, we will use data conversions for taking our own data out, doing manipulation, and loading it back in. It doesn't necessarily have to be coming from another source. Now, in a lot of systems, if you have access to and feel comfortable doing so, you could just do a Q&D to manipulate the data that you have in your system. But in other situations, where perhaps people don't have that comfort level with manipulating the data conversion offers some pretty good tools to do that sort of thing. And I want to give credit where credit's due here. Linda Wright from Infor, who wrote this set of data conversion programs, has done a wonderful job on them. She's put a lot of thought and careful planning into these and has put together a group of programs that, not just to do the conversion, but ones that you can trust in, because, they haven't just been used by you. They've been used by hundreds of other clients to load data. So it's not like it's going to do something unexpected and blow stuff away. Having said that, data conversions are dangerous. It gives you great power to manipulate great amounts of information. It also gives you great power to destroy lots of information if it's done without a clear understanding of how the process works. So it's just one of those things. It can be a very powerful tool, but it can also be a very dangerous tool. All right, Brian, you want to move on to the next one here? Call to action. All right, examine your data. If you're going to call me to discuss data conversions, I would much prefer if you went in and you did a little checking on your data and you say, hey, we have 760 GL accounts that we want to cross-reference and load. If you know that data up front, I have a much better idea of what I would recommend for you to do. If you just call and say, hey, we got GL that we want to convert, well, that doesn't tell me much. If you do that work up front, it'll save us some time. Review the data you're considering converting, the size of your database, number of records, all that sort of thing, and check out the key elements. Alpha, numeric, do you have customers that are coming over that you're going to have to cross-reference? Do you have buyers that have different IDs that you would like to standardize? Kind of go through, just examine the data first, just to get a comfort level on your end, then give us a call, we'll go through it. And then I think it's time to open this up to questions. Please feel free to ask away, but before you do, Brian, if I could ask you to unmute so that I'll actually be able to hear any questions.
Yep, we actually have everybody unmuted, so please feel free to ask your questions. And you see, ask questions, we'll open up the lines for people to do that.
Well, that was a pretty easy question and answer session.
Well, it sounds.
I'm liking that.
Maybe you covered all the points that are needed there. Awesome.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I would like to first thank Colin for his participation in today's session. You know, Colin has done this so many times with so many customers. He really understands, you know, how this gets done. Again, with you know, any version of SXE that's out there. I did want to also give a little bit of advance notice for the next in our series. So we're going to take a break in August, which is usually a horrible month for trying to do a webinar with vacation schedules and such. So our next one is actually going to be held September 12th, 2 o'clock Eastern. Everybody that's on this call will certainly get notified as we get closer to that particular date. It will be on business continuity and disaster recovery. Just a couple quick items there. NSA actually provides a best-of-breed solution in that space. A lot of times people think of, you know, backup as, you know, just backing up data files and so forth. Well, it's truly all about how quickly you can get your business running again. So it's more than just data. It includes, you know, your programs. It includes your operating system, all your software applications, all your security, etc. All those elements also need to be included in your backup. So that's known as image-based backup, which is what NSA does. We actually also have a ransomware detection capability. So if you happen to be hit by a ransomware before your files all get locked down, we already have a pre-notification that something is in process, and we oftentimes are able to be proactive and actually get you recovered before you actually have your data all encrypted and so forth. So it's kind of nice to be able to be ahead of that curve. One final thing that I'll mention, no company is immune from ransomware or virus infections. Actually, even at NSA, with our best practices that we have, we actually got hit with ransomware ourselves a few weeks ago. Fortunately, we had, you know, we believe in eating our own dog food, if you will. We have this particular business continuity solution in place. We recovered within 30 minutes. So I can't stress the value of the business continuity piece. You know, just one time will save you, you know, substantial costs from being, you know, under an hour or two to recover versus what oftentimes may be days if it's only data that's backed up. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for attending today's session. Again, everyone that's on this call will be receiving a recording of this session along with a copy of the slide decks. And I would just invite you to please contact us for further information or interest if you have in doing data conversion, if you have a need for it. And please be looking for our next session that'll be in September 12th. Thank you all again for attending.